Walk into any American car dealership in 2028 and you'll see a very different picture. Gone are the Japanese hatchbacks, the German saloons, the Korean SUVs. It's stars and stripes as far as the eye can see. This all-American lineup is the result of the American Cars Only policy, a bold move by the government in 2025. The policy mandated that every new car sold in the U.S. had to be built right here on American soil. This wasn't just about cars, it was about jobs, about industry, about putting America back on top. The policy promised a manufacturing renaissance, a surge in employment, and a boost to the American economy. It was a gamble, a huge one, and it sent shockwaves through the global car industry. The impact was immediate. Factories that had been silent for years roared back to life. Assembly lines hummed with activity. Thousands of Americans found work in the auto industry and related sectors. Steel mills, parts suppliers, and logistics companies all felt the ripple effect. For a while it seemed like the American dream was back, bigger and bolder than ever. The American Cars Only policy was a shot in the arm for the domestic auto industry. Decades of decline seemed to reverse overnight. Ford, GM, and Chrysler ramped up production, dusting off old factories and building new ones. Jobs, once lost to overseas competition, returned, bringing hope and prosperity to struggling communities. The policy's impact went beyond the factory floor. Steel mills, once on the verge of closure, fired up their furnaces to meet the surging demand for American-made steel. Parts suppliers, from tire manufacturers to electronics companies, expanded their operations, creating a ripple effect of economic growth throughout the country. The American auto industry, once left for dead, was back in the driver's seat, but this sudden resurgence came at a cost. With limited competition from foreign automakers, American car companies had less incentive to keep prices in check. The law of supply and demand kicked in with a vengeance. The result? A hefty price increase for the American consumer. This wasn't just about luxury models either. Even basic family sedans saw price jumps that made them unaffordable for many. The dream of owning a brand new American car seemed to be slipping further out of reach for many working families. The most immediate and noticeable impact of the American Cars Only policy was the steep rise in car prices. With foreign competition effectively eliminated, American automakers found themselves in the enviable position of being able to dictate prices. This lack of competition, coupled with increased demand for domestically produced vehicles, led to a perfect storm of price hikes. Consumers, faced with limited options, had little choice but to dig deeper into their pockets. The dream of owning a new car, once a rite of passage for many Americans, became increasingly out of reach for those on tight budgets. The policy, while intended to boost the American economy, had the unintended consequence of making life more expensive for the average American. The price hikes weren't the only problem. The sudden surge in demand for American cars outstripped the industry's ability to keep up. Factories, though back in operation, couldn't produce cars fast enough. Dealerships struggled to maintain inventory, and waiting lists for new cars stretched into months, sometimes even years. This shortage had a cascading effect on the used car market. With new cars in short supply, prices for used vehicles soared. Americans, unable to afford new cars or unwilling to wait, found themselves priced out of the used car market as well. The policy, designed to revitalize the auto industry, had inadvertently created a car affordability crisis. The American Cars Only policy didn't just shake up the domestic market, it sent tremors through the global automotive landscape. Foreign automakers, once dominant players in the American market, were suddenly faced with an existential threat. Some, like Toyota and BMW, responded by doubling down on their existing U.S. manufacturing plants, expanding production to meet the new Made in America requirement. Others, however, were forced to scale back their U.S. operations, resulting in job losses and factory closures. The policy ignited a wave of international trade tensions, with the EU and Japan threatening retaliatory tariffs. The global car market, once characterized by free trade and interconnected supply chains, had been fractured, with uncertain consequences for the future. The policy's impact on the global car market wasn't limited to trade tensions. It also raised questions about the future of innovation in the automotive industry. With American car makers facing less competition, some argued that they had less incentive to innovate and improve their products. Concerns were raised that the policy could stifle technological advancements, particularly in the rapidly growing electric vehicle (EV) sector. Would American car makers, shielded from the competitive pressures of the global market, keep pace with the rapid evolution of EV technology? Or would the American cars-only policy inadvertently hinder the transition to a more sustainable automotive future? America first or America last? The American cars-only policy ignited a firestorm of debate across the United States. Supporters, waving the banner of economic patriotism, hailed it as a long-overdue defense of American jobs and industry. They argued that it was high time America stopped relying on foreign manufacturers and revitalized its own industrial base. They pointed to the surge in manufacturing jobs and the revitalization of struggling communities as proof that the policy was working. Opponents, however, argued that the policy was a misguided attempt at protectionism that would ultimately harm American consumers and the economy as a whole. Critics argued that the policy was nothing more than a handout to the auto industry, paid for by American consumers in the form of higher prices and limited choices. They warned of a decline in quality and innovation as American car makers, shielded from competition, grew complacent. The debate, often heated and divisive, reflected a fundamental disagreement about the role of government in the economy and the best path forward for American manufacturing. The policy's impact on the electric vehicle sector became a particularly contentious issue. Critics argued that the policy, by focusing solely on domestic production, ignored the global nature of the EV supply chain. They pointed out that many of the key components for EVs, such as batteries and rare earth minerals, were sourced from outside the U.S. This reliance on foreign suppliers, they argued, put American EV manufacturers at a disadvantage and could stifle the growth of this crucial sector. The debate highlighted the complex challenges of balancing national economic interests with the global nature of modern manufacturing and the urgent need for international cooperation in the transition to a sustainable future. Electric dreams meet roadblocks. The American cars-only policy had a particularly complex impact on the burgeoning electric vehicle sector. On the one hand, the policy's emphasis on domestic manufacturing could have been a boon for American EV startups, providing them with a protected market to scale up production and compete with established players. However, the reality was far more nuanced. The policy's focus on traditional car makers, coupled with its disregard for the globalized nature of the EV supply chain, created significant roadblocks for the American EV sector. One of the biggest challenges faced by American EV makers was the limited domestic supply of key components, such as batteries and rare earth minerals. The policy did little to address this issue, forcing EV manufacturers to rely on foreign suppliers and navigate the complexities of international trade. This reliance on foreign suppliers, coupled with the increased costs associated with domestic manufacturing, made it difficult for American EV makers to compete on price with their foreign counterparts. Moreover, the policy's focus on protecting traditional automakers inadvertently stifled innovation in the EV sector. With less competition from foreign EV makers, American car companies had less incentive to invest heavily in EV research and development. This lack of competition, critics argued, could slow down the pace of EV adoption in the U.S. and hinder the country's transition to a more sustainable transportation future. Mixed signals on the open road. By 2028, 7 years after its implementation, the American cars-only policy presented a mixed bag of results. On the surface, the policy appeared to have achieved some of its goals. The American auto industry, once on life support, was showing signs of life. Factories were humming, unemployment was down, and communities tied to the auto industry were experiencing a resurgence. The Made in America label, once a rarity on new cars, was now ubiquitous. But beneath this veneer of success, deeper problems festered. Car prices remained stubbornly high, placing a strain on household budgets and making new cars inaccessible for many. The lack of competition, while initially beneficial for American car makers, had led to concerns about complacency and a decline in innovation. The global backlash to the policy was also taking its toll. Trade tensions simmered, and retaliatory tariffs threatened to harm other sectors of the American economy. The policy's impact on the EV sector was particularly concerning, with critics arguing that it had hampered innovation and slowed down the transition to a more sustainable transportation future. Can American cars compete? The American cars-only policy, a bold experiment in economic nationalism, left the American auto industry at a crossroads. The policy had undoubtedly provided a short-term boost, revitalizing domestic manufacturing and creating jobs, but the long-term consequences remained uncertain. Could American car makers, accustomed to operating within a protected market, compete on a global stage against innovative foreign rivals? The answer to that question in 2028 was far from clear, The policy had created a dependence on government intervention, raising questions about the industry's long-term viability without such support. The lack of competition, while initially beneficial, had also created a risk of complacency and a decline in innovation. The global backlash to the policy, with its threat of trade wars and economic isolation, had cast a long shadow over the American economy. As the sun set on the American cars-only era, one thing was certain: the road ahead for the American auto industry was paved with uncertainty. Only time would tell whether this bold gamble would ultimately lead to a brighter future or a dead end.